Welcome back to Ranch Beat, where every country song has a story, and we tell it. Today, a song that began as a private confession and became one of the biggest crossover moments in Australian country. It's Kasey Chambers' Not Pretty Enough. And here's what most people don't know. It almost never left her notebook.
Now this is real country. Simple, direct, and a little vulnerable. Quick facts up front. Song, Not Pretty Enough. Artist, Kasey Chambers. Country, Australia. Year of major success, 2000. The vibe? Intimate, spare, and unflinchingly honest.
Fast overview. Kasey wrote this as a private note, a late-night, almost pleading melody about insecurity. The Chambers family, steeped in Australian roots and road life, brought it into the studio. Nash Chambers helped shape a production that didn't dress the song up. It left the rawness visible. Then, against some early radio hesitation, the single climbed the ARIA charts, and suddenly mainstream listeners were hearing something they didn't expect from country radio.
Let me paint the picture. Australian country around the late 90s had a strong roots tradition, the Dead Ringer Band, the road country aesthetic, but it wasn't always breaking into pop radio. The Chambers family were inside that scene. Kasey's voice felt familiar to the country crowd, but her writing, especially on this song, hit a nerve that crossed genres.
Let's roll this back to the beginning. Kasey grew up touring with her family, writing songs in kitchens and hotel rooms. Not Pretty Enough reads like a page torn from that life, private, almost confessional. Before this was a hit, it was just an idea, scribbled down and carried around. That intimacy is the engine of the song.
Historically, the Chambers family carried a lot of credibility in Australian roots music. Nash Chambers had production chops and a feel for restraint. That restraint mattered. Instead of layering harmonies and big arrangements, they made choices that foregrounded the lyric and Kasey's voice. This was not a polished radio confection. It was deliberate minimalism.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. The title, Not Pretty Enough, is blunt. It's a line that could alienate commercial radio. It's not an easy party chorus. But that bluntness is also the song's power. Listen to this line for a second. Am I not pretty enough for you? It's not rhetorical. It's the narrator asking for a truth she fears she already knows.
Here's the twist in the story. The phrase reads like insecurity, yes, but in performance it becomes almost conversational, like a quiet accusation and a plea at the same time. That duality is what let listeners from different backgrounds identify with it. Most folks don't know this part. The phrasing Kasey uses bends the feeling away from melodrama and toward real, lived vulnerability.
Okay, line by line time. We'll pick 3 revealing lyrics and unpack them. First, the title line that Sam just mentioned. Second, a moment of resignation in the verses where the narrator admits they keep waiting for a change. And third, a quieter contact point, the way she closes a phrase that leaves space for the listener to finish the sentence. Each of those moments shows how the song turns self-doubt into communal feeling.
Let's take lyric 2, where she sings about not being enough to hold someone's attention. On paper, it's simple, but in Kasey's delivery, there's a small inflection on certain words, a breath, a hesitation, that signals both resignation and hope. Musically, that space is left by sparse accompaniment, so the listener leans in to fill it.
And here's the third moment, the outro phrasing, where she doesn't demand an answer, she leaves it open. Now you'll never hear this song the same way again after you notice how she times those silences. It makes the song feel like an ongoing conversation, not a finished statement.
Touching on credits, Kasey is the songwriter. That's central. Nash Chambers is credited as a producer and collaborator who helped keep the arrangement minimal. Session players credited on the record provide subtle texture, acoustic guitar, understated bass, and light percussion. Those choices kept the voice front and center.
We should flag a quick safety note here. When we talk about who did what in the studio, a lot of the full picture comes from liner notes and interviews. We've cross-checked main credits, but when anecdotes come from press interviews, we'll frame them as reported memories rather than literal transcripts. That said, the production ethos is unmistakable. Restraint.
Most folks don't know this part. Nash's production on Kasey's early records refused the temptation to fill emotional space with polish. Instead,
A clean acoustic bed and close miking on Kasey's vocal made every breath audible. That mic-up, intimate vocal approach is a production decision you can point to and say, that's why this song felt so immediate on radio and on record.
And that intimacy brought us to the drama. The label reportedly hesitated at first. They worried the title and the naked emotion might not be radio-friendly. The label hated it. The fans loved it. But radio DJ early adopters started playing it, and listeners responded in a way that made the label rethink the single strategy.
Here's the wild part. Several regional stations picked it up because people called in saying they related to the song. That grassroots push mattered. The single's trajectory from quiet airing to ARIA success shows how emotional truth can override a label's commercial hesitation.
Tour stories add color. Imagine Kasey on stage, a small crowd singing back the lines you wouldn't expect anyone to say aloud. Those moments proved the song's reach. It wasn't just critics or industry. It was people in the audience naming their own insecurity and finding company in it.
Fun fact, the song's rise also opened doors for other Australian country writers. It showed that a frank, female perspective could cut through both the country scene and the mainstream. That cultural ripple is part of why we revisit tracks like this on Ranch Beat.
Music notes time. The arrangement is deceptively simple. Acoustic guitar frames most of the song, a restrained bass anchors it, and percussion is more texture than drive. There's space in the mix, and that space is a storytelling tool. You can hear the strings of the guitar breathe. You can hear Kasey find the words.
You can hear it in the guitar. The voicings leave open intervals that create a sense of longing. The production avoids sweeping reverb or big harmonies. Instead, there are occasional backing touches that color the vocal without covering it. This is classic country energy turned inward.
Why does this matter? Because that restraint makes the lyric do the work. If they had smoothed every edge, the honesty would have been softened. This isn't just clever writing, it's personal. And the way it's recorded forces you to believe it.
Cultural impact. On one level, the single widened mainstream space for Australian country. On another, it made room for female songwriters to be blunt about insecurity without apology. That shift matters more than chart positions. It influenced how writers approached vulnerability on record.
If you're a songwriter listening right now, here's a takeaway. Sometimes the best production choice is to do less. Let the lyric live. Let the vocal be imperfect in a human way. That's the lesson Kasey and Nash handed the scene, and it changed expectations.
And for listeners curious about regional scenes, Australia has its own storytelling cadence and road music traditions. When those traditions meet a plain-spoken song like Not Pretty Enough, the result can travel far beyond national borders because the emotional core is universal.
Wrap up. One specific listening tip before we go. Next time you listen, pay attention to Kasey's timing on the line, "Am I not pretty enough for you?" She slightly delays certain words, leaving micro-pauses that let the listener finish the sentence in their head. That tiny timing choice flips the line from accusation to confession and back again. Now you'll never hear this song the same way again.
We also want to be clear. When we interpret emotional intent, we're offering a reading grounded in interviews, liner notes, and the record itself. There's always room for multiple perspectives, and we encourage you to bring your own.
All right, before we sign off, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Ranch Beat and leave a rating. Tell us in the comments what lyrics stuck with you from Not Pretty Enough, or suggest the next country song you want us to unpack. Any country except Thailand, of course.
And if you want deeper reading, check the episode notes for our sources, liner credits, ARIA chart listings, and interviews with Kasey and Nash. We try to stick to documented accounts. When stories vary, we call that out.
Thanks for listening. This has been Ranch Beat. Next time you hear that song on the radio or in a playlist, listen for those breaths and pauses. Every country song has a story, and we tell it.